Perhaps because you boast of one and not the other. But I suspect a sense of modesty is an impertinence to such a lady as Mrs. Clement.
Your mother takes a sense of modesty in unprecedented distance. Why doesn't she come out more? She frets in the shadows.
She does not fret, Father. Or if she does, you well know the cause is your indifference. A house, a garden, a horse, a wife, the preferential order.
Your mother, madam, is excessively keen to have this house down on paper. Or perhaps it is you that is keen. And your mother is merely your surrogate.
I admit, Mr. Neville, to being a supplicant on my mother's behalf. But she does not want it for herself, but for her husband.
Well, the supplication, then, has a long and diverse path. I am flattered. But may not Mr. Herbert himself do his own commissioning?
The point of the exercise, Mr. Neville, is to avoid that one thing. You, Mr. Neville, are to be the instrument of a hopeful reconciliation.
The conditions of the agreement, Mr. Noyes, are my services as draftsman for 12 days for the manufacture of 12 drawings of the estate and gardens, parks and outlying buildings of Mr. Herbert's property. The sites for the 12 drawings to be chosen at my discretion, though advised by Mrs. Herbert.
For which, Thomas, I am willing to pay £8 a drawing, to provide full board for Mr. Neville and his servant. And,
madam?
And to agree to meet Mr. Neville in private and to comply with his requests concerning his pleasure with me.
The English are not blessed with the most appropriate fecundity at the moment. They can raise colonies, but not heirs to the throne.
Depends, Mr. Tellman, which colonies you are speaking of. Some of England's oldest colonies have heirs in plenty.
Ah, Mr. Neville, do we have an indication of Scottish sympathies?
Madam, you will be reading far too much into what is simply a statement of fact. My instructions, which have been given great consideration, should be observed. I'm painstaking enough to notice quite small changes in the landscape. Once started, I make that a committal, madam, whatsoever ensues. And I think you can surmise that it is an attitude from which I obtain great satisfaction and some entertainment.
Thomas, can you remember when Mr. Herbert had his clothes packed, whether he took his French boots?
Look, madam. This man has no head. A typical German characteristic.
Mr. Neville, you're talking about my son-in-law.
By the grace of God, madam, you are to have a grandson by him. Someday. Is that not a better thing to talk about?
And you mock my money and my person to draw caricatures.
With my memory, 3 pictures in the house, and your personal knowledge of the subject, I intend to place the head of Mr. Herbert on these shoulders as a fitting and appropriate acknowledgement of your husband and his property.
If he should return.
Why, madam, what a strange thing to say.
If he should return home to me.
Madam, who is this child who walks the garden with such a solemn look on his face?
That is my husband's nephew, Mr. Neville.
You attract servants like a little midget king. What is his patrimony, madam?
His father was killed at Osbergenfeld. His mother became a Catholic, so my husband had him brought to England.
To be reared as a little Protestant.
He was an orphan, Mr. Neville, and needed to be looked after.
An orphan, madam, because his mother became a Catholic?
Who will be your husband's direct heir after you?
A future grandson, Mr. Neville, though not after me. Mr. Herbert does not believe in a woman owning property.
And what about your daughter and her husband?
Well, they would be guardians on a grandson's behalf. Do you intend to study legal matters, Mr. Neville?
You must forgive my curiosity, madam.
And chasing sheep is a tiresome habit best left to shepherds. If Mr. Neville chases sheep, he is not to be emulated. Drawing is an attribution worth very little, and in England worth nothing at all. If you must scribble, I suggest that your time would be better spent in studying mathematics. I would engage a tutor. And who knows? One day, you, Augustus, may add the Talman name to the Royal Society. Augustus! Your tutor, of course, must be German. There are already far too many English influences on your life as it is.
I hear that you are not averse to exchanging exercise on a new horse for standing to attention in the hot sun, like a halberdier.
What control you must exercise, Mr. Neville. It sounds as if you might be better employed as a military man, rather than as someone who merely draws a landscape. Mrs. Herbert, whatever is the price you must pay to capture this general who leads the wheat by the ear?
Gentlemen, Mrs. Herbert pays no price she cannot afford. And thanks to her generosity, I am permitted to take my pleasure without hindrance on her property. And to enjoy the maturing delights of her country garden. And gentlemen, there is much there to be surprised at and applauded.
There is no way, Mr. Neville, that I was going to wear that coat a third day.
We are indeed, Mr. Talman, losing the novelty of this situation. First, I was graced with the presence of Mrs. Talman, 2 servants, a maid, and a meal served on silver plate. Now what have we? Yourself, dressed in the wrong clothes.
Mr. Neville, enough. Your enthusiasm for complaint knows no limit. For a fee of £8, your impertinence is too expensive.
Would you have me be impertinent for nothing, sir?
For nothing, Mr. Neville, I would have you run off my property. Good day.
Your property, Mr. Talman. Mr. Talman, you've forgotten your riding boots.
They are not mine, Mr. Neville. I felt sure that they were yours.
That shirt, Mr. Neville, is prominent enough in your drawing. Would it be possible, do you think, to disguise its presence?
Madam, I try very hard never to distort or to dissemble.
Would that always be your method of working, Mr. Neville?
It would.
Well, let me make a little speech. In your drawing of the north side of the house, my father's cloak lies wrapped around the feet of a figure of Bacchus. In the drawing of the prospect over which my husband turns an appreciative gaze, you will have noticed that there is unclaimed a pair of riding boots. In the drawing of the park from the east side, it is possible to see leaning against my father's wardroom a ladder usually put to use for the collecting of apples. And in the drawing of the laundry, there is a jacket of my father's slit across the chest. Do you not think that before long you might find the body that inhabited all those clothes?
I am thinking very hard, madam, about the drawing you've left out. And you, madam, were in that drawing.
Are you sure, Mr. Neville?
Well, the sound of you was in the drawing. You were playing the spinet.
I thought, Mr. Neville, that we had discussed the pictorial equivalence of noise without conclusion. Perhaps it was not me playing the spinet. Have you thought of that?
And who, madam, was it?
You see, Mr. Neville, you are already beginning to play the game rather skillfully.
4 garments and a ladder do not lead us to a corpse.
Mr. Neville, I said nothing about a corpse.
Madam, you are ingenious. It is as if you had planned it. Your father is in Southampton. He would not miss his clothes or notice the ladder.
Is my father in Southampton, Mr. Neville? My mother told you that. And you must realize that she is a lady of few words and not incapable of a few stratagems. Have you not thought how hard she persuaded you to be her draftsman? to draw her husband's house while her husband was away.
Her explanation for that can be supported.
Perhaps, Mr. Neville, you have taken a great deal on trust.
I look forward, Mrs. Talman, to the eventual purpose and outcome of this ingenuity. My last 6 drawings will be redolent of the mystery. I will proceed step by step to the heart of the matter.
Perhaps to the heart of my father, Mr. Neville.
Lying crimson on a piece of green grass.
What a pity, Mr. Neville, that your drawings are in black and white.
No, you rush ahead, Mrs. Talman. The items are innocent.
Taken one by one, they could so be construed. Taken together, you could be regarded as a witness to misadventure.
Misadventure, madam? What misadventure? There is no misadventure.
More than a witness, Mr. Neville. An accessory to misadventure.
Madam, you are fanciful.
Mr. Neville, I have grown to believe that a really intelligent man makes an indifferent painter.
Perhaps he has an eye for optical theory. Or the plight of lovers. Or the passing of time. What do you think? Perhaps, madam, he has, and I would stand by him in this, an interest in the pictorial conceit. Can you see why your husband had reason to buy it?
It is of a garden. That is probably reason enough.
True, but what of the events that are happening within it?
Shall we peruse it together? Do you see, madam, a narrative in these apparently unrelated episodes? There is drama, is there not, in this overpopulated garden? What intrigue is here? Do you think the characters have something to tell us? Would you know, madam, if your daughter had any particular interest in this painting? Madam, could you put a season to it? Madam, do you have an opinion? What infidelities are portrayed here? Do you think that murder is being prepared?